Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 became one of the greatest mysteries in modern aviation after its disappearance on March 8, 2014. The flight, traveling from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to Beijing, China, had 239 people on board, including passengers and crew. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft, a Boeing 777, lost contact with air traffic control. And since then, nothing has been known about its whereabouts, despite international search efforts of unprecedented scale. The plane took off at 12:41, but 1 hour later, around 1:20, the last communication with the aircraft occurred routinely. At 1:37, civilian radar lost contact with the flight. What followed was even more baffling. Military radar data showed that the plane not only deviated from its route, but also flew in the opposite direction, changing course and crossing the South China Sea and then the Indian Ocean. This indicated that the aircraft was still airborne, but it was unknown who was in control or what had exactly happened to the crew. Malaysian authorities reported that the aircraft had made an unexpected turn, and it was determined that it likely flew for hours after losing contact, based on automatic satellite data sent by the aircraft to a ground station. For several days, authorities believed the plane had crashed into the South China Sea, but soon the search expanded to other areas, becoming a massive international effort involving several countries and thousands of people, yet with no conclusive results. What made the disappearance even more unsettling was the lack of clear answers about what had happened to the aircraft. Despite intensive searches, the rest of the plane and most of the passengers were never found. Over the years, only a small part of the aircraft has been recovered, particularly a piece of wing flap on an island in the Indian Ocean, which added even more uncertainty to the case. How is it possible that such a large plane could disappear so suddenly without leaving a trace? This was one of the first questions that fueled speculation about what really happened that night. As the months passed, without significant progress, numerous theories and speculations began to emerge about what could have happened to Flight MH370. One of the most widely debated theories was the possibility that the plane had been hijacked. It was suggested that although air hijackings were not common at that time, the disappearance of the aircraft and the lack of traces of its location indicated that it may have been deliberately diverted. However, this theory was not fully supported, since there were no demands of any kind and no terrorist group claimed responsibility for the act. Another of the most controversial theories involved the actions of the pilot or the crew. It was speculated that the pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah, had deliberately taken control of the plane, diverting the aircraft onto an unknown route and seizing control of its final destination. However, it could not be proven that the pilot was involved in a deliberate act of sabotage, and investigations found insufficient evidence to confirm this hypothesis. Despite this, reports pointed to the existence of some unusual behaviors by the crew in the days leading up to the flight, but this was not enough to confirm any theory of sabotage. Other theories pointed to technical failures in the aircraft, such as a loss of pressurization or a malfunction that would have left the crew and passengers incapacitated. In this scenario, the plane would have continued flying automatically until it ran out of fuel and eventually crashed. However, this theory did not explain why the aircraft flew for so many hours without any communication, and why more debris from the flight was not found, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. One of the most complex theories was that of a catastrophic accident or a fire on board that caused the loss of control of the plane and its fall into the ocean. The fact that the aircraft flew for several hours after the loss of contact suggests that automatic systems may have been operating, allowing for the hypothesis that the plane could have flown for some time without human control. However, as with the other theories, there was not enough evidence to confirm it. Finally, the theory most widely accepted by authorities and investigators, though without absolute consensus, was that the aircraft ultimately crashed in a remote region of the Indian Ocean after running out of fuel. However, the search in this area, which became one of the largest in history, has failed to locate most of the aircraft's remains. The disappearance of Flight MH370 has not only been one of the greatest mysteries in aviation, but also one of the most complex and costly search operations in history. Over the years, an incredible amount of resources and effort has been deployed in an attempt to find the aircraft and understand what happened. Initially, the search began in the South China Sea, where the plane had lost contact, but it soon expanded to other areas based on the last detected satellite signals, suggesting that the aircraft had traveled south over the Indian Ocean. The search in the Indian Ocean began to focus on a vast area near the Kerguelen Islands in the southern part of the ocean. Malaysian authorities, in collaboration with several countries, deployed ships, aircraft, and submersibles to explore the seabed in search of wreckage. In 2015, a wing fragment was found on Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean, which gave investigators renewed hope. Although the discovery did not solve the mystery, other fragments of the aircraft were later found along the coasts of several countries in the region. But the absence of the main wreckage maintained the uncertainty. The Malaysian government and the Australian Transport Safety Bureau were the main bodies responsible for coordinating the search in the Indian Ocean, which covered an area of more than 120,000 square kilometers. Despite the magnitude of the effort, the search has not been able to determine the precise location of the aircraft, leading to frustration among both the passengers' families and aviation experts. In 2018, the official search was suspended due to the lack of significant progress. However, some independent experts and private research groups continue to analyze data and theories in an effort to shed more light on what happened. At present, the case remains an enigma, and although some theories suggest that the aircraft may have been shot down or suffered a catastrophic technical failure, the full truth about the fate of Flight MH370 remains unknown. Flight MH370 is a haunting reminder of the inherent risks of air travel, and the case continues to be a symbol of uncertainty and frustration in the search for answers. Despite massive efforts and technological advances, the mystery surrounding the fate of this flight remains unresolved, leaving the world with one of the most perplexing disappearances in the history of modern aviation. The Cooper case is one of the most fascinating and baffling mysteries in the criminal history of the United States. On November 24, 1971, a man who called himself Dan Cooper, although he would later become known simply as D.B. Cooper due to an error in a police report, hijacked a passenger aircraft on a commercial flight traveling from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727, became the scene of one of the most extraordinary hijackings ever recorded. Cooper boarded the plane in Portland carrying a briefcase, sat in seat 18C, and shortly after takeoff handed a note to a flight attendant stating that he had a bomb in his briefcase and would detonate it if his demands were not met. Cooper demanded $200,000 in low-denomination bills, equivalent to more than $1 million today, 4 parachutes, and an aircraft prepared so he could leave the plane after receiving the money. The crew, terrified but with no alternatives, alerted the authorities, and within a short time, the police, the FBI, and the National Guard mobilized to meet Cooper's demands. The plane landed in Seattle, where the ransom money and the parachutes were delivered. Cooper then allowed the 36 passengers on board to be released, but he kept the crew members and ordered the plane to take off again toward Mexico, following a specific route indicated by him. During the flight, Cooper remained calm and displayed polite and controlled behavior, without using direct violence against the crew. After making sure the plane was flying at low altitude and with the rear stairway deployed, he jumped from the aircraft in mid-air with the $200,000 in cash and one of the parachutes. He leapt from the plane at night, in the middle of a storm and under adverse weather conditions, while the aircraft continued its journey south. The next day, the plane landed safely in Reno, Nevada, and the search for Cooper began immediately. However, the FBI investigation, which lasted for more than 45 years and was one of the most extensive in its history, failed to find any trace of the hijacker or the money, and Cooper's identity remains an unsolved mystery. Although in 1980 some fragments of bills were found in the Columbia River, buried in the sand by a child playing in the area, the parachutist and most of the loot were never located. Over the years, the Cooper case has generated countless theories and speculations about his identity and his fate. The details of the hijacking and the daring jump have fueled hypotheses about whether he survived or died during the fall, and about how he managed to disappear without leaving a trace. Despite exhaustive searches in forests, rivers, and mountainous areas, the lack of conclusive evidence has allowed theories about the hijacker to continue to proliferate. One of the most widely accepted theories suggests that Cooper may have survived the jump and managed to escape undetected, possibly with the help of accomplices or thanks to careful planning. According to this hypothesis, Cooper may have headed to a rural area or even left the country, using the money to vanish. Some people believe that the money found years later in the Columbia River could have been part of the original loot, indicating that Cooper hid the rest elsewhere. Another line of thought points to Cooper having prior experience in parachuting or military training. The fact that he specifically requested 4 parachutes instead of 1 has been interpreted by some experts as a strategy to prevent authorities from sabotaging the equipment, or as a sign that he had technical knowledge about parachute jumps. It has also been noted that Cooper gave precise instructions regarding the plane's speed, altitude, and wing configuration, which reinforces the idea that he possessed basic aeronautical knowledge. Over the decades, numerous suspects were investigated by the FBI, including military veterans, pilots, and individuals with criminal backgrounds, but none could be definitively linked to the hijacking. In 2016, the FBI announced the official closure of the active investigation, arguing that there were no longer any viable new leads. Although the case remains symbolically open and continues to be analyzed by independent investigators and enthusiasts of unsolved mysteries. Despite multiple attempts to solve the case, the mystery of D.B. Cooper remains one of the most enduring enigmas in American criminal history. His audacious hijacking, his disappearance without a trace, and the absence of definitive evidence have turned the case into a legend within popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, films, and theories for decades. D.B. Cooper remains a symbol of the perfect crime and of the uncertainty surrounding unsolved cases, leaving a question that continues to fascinate the world. Who was D.B. Cooper really, and what happened to him after that leap into the darkness? One of the most intriguing and chilling criminal cases in history is that of Jack the Ripper, a killer who terrorized the streets of London in the year 1888. What makes this case so baffling is that despite exhaustive police efforts and countless theories about his identity, the murderer was never captured, leaving behind a trail of mystery that continues to intrigue criminologists, historians, and enthusiasts of unsolved cases. To this day, the setting of the crimes was the Whitechapel district, a poor and grim area in London's East End. The most well-known victim of Jack the Ripper was Mary Ann Nichols, a 43-year-old woman found brutally murdered in the early morning hours of August 31st, 1888. This was the first in a series of horrifying murders involving women who worked on the streets, most of whom were prostitutes. The crimes were marked by extreme violence, with victims mutilated in a manner that suggested anatomical knowledge, leading some to theorize that the killer may have been a doctor or someone with surgical skills. What made these murders even more terrifying was that in every case, the victims were attacked in public places, and at times witnesses reported seeing a suspicious man, but there was never enough evidence to identify him conclusively. The police, who were completely overwhelmed by the nature of the crimes, began receiving letters that were supposedly sent by the killer himself. The most famous of these is known as the Ripper Letter, in which the author boasted of his crimes and mocked the police's attempts to catch him. The mystery surrounding the identity of Jack the Ripper has fueled all kinds of theories and speculation over the years. Some believe he was an ordinary man, while others argue that he may have been someone close to the aristocracy or a doctor, based on the precision of the mutilations. However, to this day, no one has been able to identify this killer with certainty, making this case one of the most perplexing in the history of criminology. The investigation into the Jack the Ripper murders was one of the most intense of its time, though not without controversy. In 1888, authorities did not have access to the advanced forensic investigation methods we know today, which made the collection of solid evidence extremely difficult. The London police, led by Inspector Frederick Aberline, were completely overwhelmed by the scale of the crimes. Numerous interviews were conducted and several individuals were investigated, but the lack of clear evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, made the investigation even more challenging. What further complicated matters was that the crimes were extremely brutal and there was no clear pattern in how they were committed. Although all the victims were women, their ages and appearances varied, leading some to theorize that Jack the Ripper may have killed in fits of rage or was choosing his victims more randomly. In addition, many witnesses claimed to have seen a man who could have been the killer, but the descriptions were so vague and contradictory that no clear suspect could be identified. As the murders continued, tension in London increased, and authorities decided to expand the investigation nationwide, which drew international attention. Theories about the identity of Jack the Ripper began to form, and the media, such as newspapers, started speculating about his appearance and motives. However, the murders stopped as mysteriously as they began, without the killer ever being captured, which only increased the fascination with the case. Over the years, several suspects have been mentioned, but none has been proven to be the true Jack the Ripper. Among the most frequently cited are a doctor named Montague John Druitt, a lower-class man named Aaron Kosminski, and the famous painter Walter Sickert. Although the evidence against them is largely speculative and lacks solid foundations, despite these efforts, the mystery of his identity persists, turning Jack the Ripper into a legendary figure in criminology. The case of Jack the Ripper has left an indelible mark on popular culture and remains a fascinating subject of debate to this day. Although the crimes occurred more than a century ago, the name Jack the Ripper remains synonymous with mystery and terror. The figure of the serial killer who escapes justice has inspired countless books, films, and theories that attempt to solve the puzzle he left behind. The mystery of Jack the Ripper's identity has given rise to a wide range of theories and speculations, some more plausible than others. Some believe the case will never be solved due to the lack of clear evidence, while others argue that with current technological advances, it may one day be possible to identify the killer. In fact, in recent years, investigators have attempted to use modern techniques such as DNA analysis to re-examine evidence collected at the crime scenes. But so far, no definitive answer has been found. Over the years, the crimes of Jack the Ripper have influenced the way we understand serial killers. His case was one of the first to attract massive attention from both the media and the public, and it serves as an early example of how the media and popular culture can help create a legend around an unsolved crime. His story has been told and retold in countless ways, and his figure has become etched into collective memory as the prototype of the modern serial killer, continuing to fuel fascination with the case. Despite all efforts to solve it, Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest criminal mysteries of all time, and his legacy endures as a reminder that even in the modern era, there are crimes that do not always find answers. The story of Jack the Ripper remains one of the most disturbing and baffling, keeping alive the fascination with unsolved criminal cases and leaving an unanswered question: who was Jack the Ripper really? The Zodiac Killer is one of the most notorious and mysterious criminals in the history of the United States. In the mid-1960s, a series of murders terrorized Northern California, and although authorities worked tirelessly to identify the person responsible, the Zodiac was never captured. What made this case even more chilling was the way the killer taunted the police and the media, sending cryptic and defiant letters that revealed his sense of control and superiority. The first murder attributed to the Zodiac occurred on December 20th, 1968, when two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, were killed near Vallejo, California. However, the case gained widespread attention on the morning of July 4th, 1969, when the Zodiac attacked two young people, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, near Lake Berryessa. During this attack, a killer approached his victims wearing an executioner-style outfit with a mask, and after stabbing them, carved a symbol into the victim's car that later became his signature, the famous crossed circle. What set the Zodiac apart from other killers was his behavior and his interactions with the police and the media. After each murder, the Zodiac sent letters to local newspapers, some of which contained details about the crimes that only the killer could have known. In his letters, he also included encrypted codes that challenged the police and cryptographers to decipher them. These letters, many of which were signed with the Zodiac symbol, turned him into a public figure and generated a mix of fear and fascination within the community. The most famous of these letters was sent in 1969 and contained an encrypted message known as the 340 cipher, which baffled investigators and the public for years. Although it was finally deciphered in 2020, the mystery surrounding the Zodiac endured for decades, as the police were never able to find enough evidence to identify the killer. Despite ongoing police efforts, the Zodiac managed to evade capture for years. Although some of his crimes were committed in broad daylight and in relatively public areas, the killer seemed to know well how to escape and avoid attention. Throughout the course of the murders, the Zodiac never left behind fingerprints or clear physical evidence that could lead to his capture. Instead, his letters and codes were what kept public attention focused on the case. The police, despite several attempts, were unable to identify him through their investigations. The Zodiac always seemed to be one step ahead, mocking authorities in his letters. In fact, in a letter from 1970, the Zodiac even expressed satisfaction that the police could not catch him and claimed that he would continue committing crimes. Meanwhile, media pressure and fear among the population grew, fueling collective terror toward this unknown and faceless killer. One of the most intriguing aspects of this case was the apparent randomness of the murders. Although the Zodiac became a serial killer, he did not seem to follow a clear or logical pattern. At times, he attacked young couples in parked cars, while at other times, he selected individuals who were alone in isolated locations. This lack of consistency in victim selection, along with the way he seemed to vanish without a trace, contributed to the case remaining unsolved. Authorities did everything possible to create composite sketches of the killer based on witness testimonies, but there were always discrepancies in the descriptions. Some people described him as a heavyset man, while others claimed he appeared thinner. This lack of agreement, combined with the Zodiac's elusive nature, made identifying the criminal even more difficult. Over the years, many individuals have been put forward as possible suspects, and numerous books, documentaries, and theories have emerged about his identity. Among the most frequently mentioned suspects are Arthur Lee Allen, a man who was investigated multiple times but never formally charged, and Gary Francis Posty, a convicted criminal whom some believe could have been the Zodiac based on certain similarities to witness sketches. However, so far, none of these suspects has been proven to be the true Zodiac, and the mystery remains unresolved. The Zodiac case, despite never being solved, has left a deep mark on popular culture. The figure of the Zodiac, with his defiant attitude and his ability to evade capture, has become a symbol of criminal mystery and uncertainty. His skill at manipulating the police and the media, along with the letters and codes he left behind, created the image of a clever and calculating criminal who stayed beyond the reach of the law. The Zodiac's legacy remains alive today through documentaries, films, books, and podcasts that explore theories about his identity. The 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher, is one of the most popular portrayals of the case, based on the book by Robert Graysmith, who investigated the case for years. The film captures the tension, mystery, and obsession that surrounded the hunt for the killer. In addition, the Zodiac case has generated a wide range of theories about his possible identity. Some theories suggest that the Zodiac may have been a police officer or a cryptography expert due to the complex codes he left behind, while others argue that he was an individual with deep knowledge of police techniques and psychological manipulation. There have even been theories suggesting that the crimes may have been committed by a group rather than a single individual, although these theories have not been widely accepted. Despite advances in technology and new investigations that continue to emerge, the identity of the Zodiac remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminology. Each time a new attempt is made to solve the case, public fascination with the Zodiac grows, and his story continues to be a subject of debate among investigators, criminologists, and the general public. If the identity of the Zodiac is ever discovered, it would be a landmark moment in the history of unsolved crimes, closing a chapter of more than half a century of uncertainty and speculation. The case of Madeleine McCann is one of the most high-profile and mysterious cases in recent history, a case that has generated a wave of speculation, theories, and worldwide attention. Since the 3-year-old girl disappeared on the night of May 3, 2007, the McCann family, from the United Kingdom, had traveled to the coastal town of Praia da Luz in southern Portugal to spend a vacation. During that trip, Madeleine disappeared from the apartment bedroom where she was staying with her parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, while they were having dinner at a nearby restaurant with friends. What makes this case so baffling is the rapid mobilization of Portuguese and British authorities, the extensive media coverage, and the fact that despite search efforts and international attention, the child was never found. According to reports, Madeleine was last seen at around 10 o'clock at night, when her parents left her sleeping in her bed, along with her twin siblings, while they were dining about 50 meters away. When they returned to the room to check that everything was fine, they discovered that Madeleine had disappeared, leaving behind her clothes, her bed undisturbed, and no clear signs of a struggle. The disappearance was reported immediately to the authorities, and the initial investigations pointed to a possible abduction. Portuguese police, together with British authorities, launched a massive search. However, the first weeks of the investigation were chaotic. International alerts were issued, and numerous searches were carried out, but no clear trace of Madeleine was found. What complicated the case even further was that due to the massive media coverage, information about the case was distorted on multiple occasions, leading to a series of confusing theories and reports. The case of Madeleine McCann quickly became a global phenomenon, with people around the world speculating about what happened that night. From the beginning, the McCann family was viewed with suspicion by some sectors of the press, which increased tension and emotions surrounding the case. In 2008, after more than a year of investigation, Portuguese authorities decided to close the case due to a lack of evidence. However, the case never stopped being a matter of public interest, and theories about what really happened that night continue to be debated. After the initial closure of the case in 2008, authorities did not abandon the investigation, and Madeleine McCann continued to be an active case. Portuguese police officially closed the file in 2008, but the case was reopened by the Metropolitan Police in London in 2011 after a new line of inquiry was proposed. The British Home Office allocated resources to the case, allowing the investigation to be reactivated and the search for answers to continue. Over the years, theories about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann have been diverse and controversial. Some suggest that the child was abducted by an unknown individual who took her out of the resort complex, while others point to a crime within the family's close circle. This latter theory was fueled by a leaked report suggesting that, at first, Portuguese authorities considered that Madeleine's parents might have been involved in her disappearance. This hypothesis was quickly dismissed, although it left a mark on public perception of the case. Over the years, a series of new attempts have been made to solve the case. In 2017, British authorities announced that millions of pounds had been invested in the investigation, generating renewed media interest. However, despite these efforts, no conclusive evidence has been found to clarify what happened on that tragic night. The lack of evidence and ambiguous leads have made resolving the case extremely difficult. One of the most unsettling moments in the case occurred in 2019, when a man identified as Christian Bruckner, a German criminal, was linked to Madeleine's disappearance. German police began investigating Bruckner, who had been arrested in 2018 for other crimes related to child abuse and child pornography. Although German authorities stated that they had evidence placing Bruckner in the area at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, the lack of concrete proof has kept the case in a state of uncertainty. The Madeleine McCann case has left an indelible mark on society, not only because of the disappearance of such a young child, but also because of the media scrutiny and endless speculation surrounding the investigation. The McCann family has been under constant attention, receiving both support and criticism from different sectors. In the early years after the disappearance, Kate and Jerry McCann received an outpouring of emotional support from the public, but they were also attacked by some media outlets that accused them of being involved in their daughter's disappearance. Despite the attacks and media pressure, the family never stopped calling for justice and fighting to find their daughter. Madeleine McCann's disappearance has also had a significant impact on child protection laws and safety measures. The case raised greater awareness about child safety while traveling and in tourist destinations, and many countries implemented additional measures to prevent child abductions and improve police responses to similar cases. Media coverage also helped increase pressure on authorities, forcing them to keep the investigation active for years. However, despite the efforts and advances in the investigation, the case remains unresolved, leaving the McCann family in a state of constant uncertainty. The unanswered questions about what happened on that night in 2007 continue to haunt both investigators and the public. Although the theory that Madeleine was abducted by a stranger remains the most widely accepted, the fact that there is still no definitive answer leaves the door open to multiple scenarios. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is a chilling reminder of how vulnerable a child can be and of the need to continue seeking justice, no matter how much time passes. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey is one of the most chilling and complex crimes in the criminal history of the United States. JonBenet, a 6-year-old girl, was found dead in the basement of her home in Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996, after having disappeared during the night. Her death was surrounded by mystery and controversy from the very beginning, with a series of strange details that generated numerous theories and unanswered questions. That morning, JonBenet was reported missing by her mother, Patsy Ramsey, who found a ransom note in the house demanding a large sum of money in exchange for her daughter's release. The handwritten letter appeared to be a clear attempt to stage a kidnapping, but something did not add up. Police soon discovered that JonBenet was already dead and that her body had been hidden in the basement of the family home. She had suffered a blow to the head that caused a fracture to her skull, and there were also signs of asphyxiation, as if she had been strangled. What made the case even more disturbing were the circumstances surrounding the discovery of her body. The fact that her mother found a ransom note instead of receiving a phone call from kidnappers led police to question the authenticity of the note. In addition, there were several inconsistencies in the statements given by the parents and other family members. Police initially treated the case as a kidnapping followed by a murder, but they soon began to suspect that the family might be involved, which led to a much more complex investigation. From the beginning, media attention was intense, and the case became a subject of public debate across the country. Theories about the possible perpetrator of the crime began to multiply, but the lack of conclusive evidence kept the suspicions in limbo. Despite the efforts of the Boulder police, the investigation appeared to stall, and the murder of JonBenet Ramsey became one of the most high-profile and baffling cases in American criminal history. From the start of the investigation, authorities faced multiple challenges. The crime scene, which had been compromised by the presence of family members and friends in the house, made it difficult to collect useful evidence. Police also found that some key pieces of evidence, such as fingerprints on the ransom note, did not match those of family members, increasing speculation about the possible presence of an intruder. However, the evidence found did not clearly point to an external suspect, leaving investigators with few reliable leads. One of the main theories that emerged during the investigation was that the Ramsey family may have been involved in some way in JonBenet's death. Over the years, JonBenet's parents, Patsy and John Ramsey, were considered suspects, although they were never formally charged. Police focused particularly on details of the crime scene, such as the fact that JonBenet was found with a cord around her neck and a piece of cloth in her mouth, suggesting that someone close to her may have had easy access to the child and kept her in a secluded part of the house. In 1999, police issued a report in which the Ramsey family was mentioned as the main suspects, but due to a lack of concrete evidence, no charges were ever filed. Over the years, the media, both in the United States and around the world, continued to speculate about the family's involvement, fueling theories that implicated the parents, JonBenet's brother, or even an intruder who may have broken into the house. Growing media pressure and the absence of definitive evidence further complicated the investigation. In 2008, a major development occurred when police officially cleared JonBenet's parents as suspects after DNA evidence collected in the case did not match family members. Despite this exoneration, the case continued to be a source of speculation, as the DNA evidence did not provide clear answers about who committed the crime. One of the most persistent theories was that of an intruder, someone outside the family who may have entered the house and committed the murder. However, Others suggested that the killing was the result of an accident that spiraled out of control, possibly related to a fight in the home or an episode of child abuse that ended in tragedy. But despite the various theories, the identity of JonBenét's killer remains a mystery. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey, even though more than 20 years have passed since her tragic death, remains one of the most high-profile and debated criminal cases in recent history. Her death left a deep mark on society, raising questions about child safety, the relationship between the media and criminal investigations, and the way high-profile cases are handled by authorities. Over the years, many attempts have been made to solve the case, but the mystery persists. The JonBenet case has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and television programs that have analyzed every detail of the crime, from forensic evidence to witness statements. Theories about the identity of the killer continue to be discussed frequently, and the case remains a fascinating subject for criminologists and the general public alike. JonBenét's murder has also had a significant impact on the way the media covers criminal cases. The massive media coverage, which in many instances focused more on sensational aspects of the case than on the actual facts, was seen by some as an obstacle to solving the crime. The Ramseys, who were initially considered suspects, had to deal with constant media pressure, which caused them great distress and complicated their personal lives. Over the years, the case has shown that even with modern technology and advances in forensic analysis, some crimes can remain unsolved. Although police have never officially closed the case, and many people continue to seek answers, the murder of JonBenet Ramsey remains a chilling reminder of the dark secrets that can lie behind a family tragedy. The search for justice and the truth about her death continues to be one of the greatest enigmas in modern criminology. The disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi is one of the most enigmatic and complex cases in the criminal history of Italy. Emanuela, a 15-year-old girl, disappeared on June 22, 1983, under circumstances that even today remain the subject of debate and speculation. The girl, who lived in Vatican City with her family, vanished in the very center of Rome while she was on her way to a music class. She was last seen in St. Peter's Square, near Vatican City, and from that moment on, she was never heard from again. On the day of her disappearance, Emanuela had attended her music class at a music school in Rome and decided to return home by public transportation. However, upon arriving at the bus stop, a phone call to her home changed her route. During this call, Emanuela said that she would meet up with a group of friends, but she never reached her destination. From that point on, investigations were launched quickly, but the lack of clear clues about her whereabouts made progress extremely difficult. What made the case even more unsettling was the fact that Emanuela was the daughter of a Vatican employee, which gave rise to speculation about the possible involvement of the Catholic Church in her disappearance. The first hypothesis to emerge pointed to a kidnapping for extortion, since in the days following Emanuela's disappearance, her family received several phone calls demanding payments in exchange for information about her whereabouts. Although these calls were investigated by the police, they were never able to trace the kidnappers or obtain evidence confirming this theory. Over the years, the case of Emanuela Orlandi became an increasingly deep mystery involving multiple theories ranging from ordinary crime to far more complex ideas linked to politics and the church. Emanuela's disappearance was never resolved, and her family faced a long wait for answers, while the media and society remained fascinated by the mystery. Emanuela's mother, in particular, continued to fight for the case to be investigated, demanding justice and answers from the authorities. However, as time passed, the clues remained unclear, and the theories only increased in number and complexity. As time went on, the case of Emanuela Orlandi grew in mystery and controversy, in part because of theories involving the Catholic Church and the politicization of her disappearance. One of the most persistent theories is that Emanuela was kidnapped by a group of mafiosi or extremists to exert pressure on the Vatican. Some even suggested that her disappearance was linked to the Banco Ambrosiano case, a financial scandal involving the Vatican that was under investigation at the time. Banco Ambrosiano collapsed in 1982, leaving a financial hole of hundreds of millions of dollars and a series of suspicious deaths, including that of the bank's chairman, Roberto Calvi, who was found hanging from a bridge in London under mysterious circumstances. Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance coincided with the height of this scandal, leading some to speculate that her kidnapping was a tactic to distract public attention or to obtain some kind of agreement related to the bank. Another theory that has gained traction over the years is that Emanuela's disappearance may be connected to members of the Catholic Church and the Italian mafia operating in the shadows of politics and the economy during that period. The Vatican, due to its political and economic influence, was seen as fertile ground for conspiracy theories, and Emanuela's connection to the Vatican fueled these speculations. In 2008, a member of the Italian mafia, Giovanni Minerva, claimed that he knew of a connection between Emanuela's disappearance and certain power circles within the church, but his statements were never verified. In addition to speculation about the mafia and the Vatican, another line of inquiry pointed to a possible tragic mistake. Some suggested that Emanuela was the victim of a kidnapping by a person or group seeking money, but that in the end, the kidnapping was not as calculated as initially believed. Over the years, several witnesses claimed to have seen Emanuela in different parts of Rome, but no concrete lead ever revealed her whereabouts. The case of Emanuela Orlandi remains an enigma, and despite the many theories that have emerged over the years, the truth behind her disappearance is still unknown. Throughout the decades, the Orlandi family has continued to fight for answers, seeking the justice that never came. In 2012, Emanuela's brother, Pietro Orlandi, launched a campaign to reopen the case, pressuring both Italian and Vatican authorities to investigate more thoroughly. However, despite these efforts and advances in investigative technology, the case remains unsolved. In 2019, it was discovered that the remains of several bodies had been found within the Vatican, sparking renewed hope that a clue might finally emerge to help solve the case. However, after DNA analysis was conducted, the remains were determined not to belong to Emanuela. Despite this disappointment, the case continues to be the subject of speculation, and many believe that the truth about what happened to Emanuela is hidden, possibly due to political and social interests involving some of the most powerful circles in Italian society. Regarding the Church's connection to the case, the Vatican has never offered a clear answer about Emanuela's disappearance, which has increased suspicions that something may be being concealed. Over the years, the mystery of Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance has not only affected her family, but has also left an indelible mark on public perception of the Vatican and the Catholic Church. The lack of transparency and ongoing speculation fuel the sense that there is more behind her disappearance that has never been revealed. The disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi remains one of the most chilling and disturbing cases in Italy, with each new generation of investigators and journalists attempting to shed light on what happened. Meanwhile, Emanuela's family continues its relentless search for truth and justice. Tupac Amaru Shakur was one of the most influential and controversial artists in music, a hip-hop icon who not only left an indelible mark on the music industry, but also became a cultural symbol. With his lyrical skill, his activism, and his defiant attitude, Tupac earned both respect and animosity from many people. However, his life was tragically cut short when he was murdered in Las Vegas on the night of September 7, 1996, at the age of 25. The death of Tupac, one of the most famous rappers of all time, occurred in a context of growing tension between two of the main hip-hop factions of the 1990s, Death Row Records based on the West Coast and Bad Boy Records based on the East Coast. The rivalry between these two record labels, along with personal disputes between artists and power struggles within the industry, contributed to what would later become known as the Rap War. Tupac, in particular, was at the center of this conflict, and his life was marked by a series of incidents that linked him to violence and controversy. On the night of his murder, Tupac attended a boxing match between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas. After the event, Tupac, along with his friend and producer, Marion Suge Knight, was on his way back to his car when they were ambushed. At 11:15 at night, Tupac was shot in a drive-by shooting. He suffered multiple gunshot wounds, including one to the chest that caused severe injuries. Despite efforts to save him, Tupac died 6 days later, on September 13, 1996, due to the severity of his wounds. Tupac's shooting was a shocking moment for the music industry and left millions of fans and observers with more questions than answers. Although it was a highly publicized murder, the exact circumstances of his death remain a mystery, fueling theories and speculation that persist to this day. These theories include personal disputes, conflicts between rival gangs, and the intensification of the East Coast-West Coast feud. But the case remains officially unsolved, making it one of the greatest enigmas in popular culture. The murder of Tupac Shakur has generated countless theories and speculations over the years, largely due to the lack of conclusive evidence and the unresolved nature of the case. Many of these theories revolve around violence within the hip-hop world, the rivalry between major record labels, and Tupac's connections to different circles within the music industry. One of the most popular and controversial theories is related to the dispute between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records, particularly involving the notorious B.I.G., a prominent East Coast rapper and member of Bad Boy. The rivalry between Tupac and Biggie Smalls, along with their respective labels, had escalated in the years leading up to the murder. Tupac was the victim of a shooting in 1994 at the Quad Recording Studios in New York, an attack that, although never resolved, fueled the idea that personal and professional conflicts lay behind the violence. Tupac's murder occurred months after this shooting, leading many to believe it may have been an act of revenge. The theory that the notorious B.I.G. was involved in Tupac's death in some way has been widely discussed, although no concrete evidence has ever been presented to prove his involvement. The rivalry between both artists culminated in Tupac's murder, but just 1 year later, Biggie Smalls was killed in similar circumstances in Los Angeles, further fueling the theory that both crimes were connected. Another theory suggests that Tupac's shooting may have been the result of an internal dispute within the music industry itself, particularly within Death Row Records. Suge Knight, the chief executive officer of Death Row, was a powerful and controversial figure with ties to street gangs and illicit activities. Some speculate that Tupac's murder may have been related to internal power struggles within the label, or to Suge's desire to maintain control over Tupac's legacy. Although Suge was present at the time of the shooting, he has never been formally charged, and his involvement in the crime remains a matter of speculation. An additional theory suggests that Tupac's murder was a gang-related attack. Tupac had been associated with various gang-affiliated individuals during his life, and some believe the dispute may have involved members of the Los Angeles gang community, with connections to street violence. In fact, some reports suggest that ongoing shootings between different factions on the streets of Los Angeles may have influenced Tupac's murder. However, this theory lacks direct evidence and is largely based on speculation. Despite the many theories surrounding his death, the murder of Tupac remains an unsolved mystery, and his legacy continues to be a fundamental part of the history of hip-hop and popular culture. Tupac was a figure who transcended his music, using his platform to address social issues such as racism, poverty, police violence, and injustice. Through his lyrics and activism, Tupac inspired generations of young people, and his life and death have become symbols of struggle and resistance. Since his death, Tupac has remained an omnipresent figure in music culture, with his music, his art, and his messages of empowerment continuing to influence contemporary artists. The uncertainty surrounding his death has only increased his mystique and his influence, turning him into an icon who continues to be revered in the world of hip-hop and beyond. Tupac's murder has given rise to numerous theories, documentaries, books, and conferences that attempt to unravel the mystery. The lack of an official resolution has allowed the case to remain a fascinating blend of speculation, intrigue, and myth. However, the years have passed, and the absence of new, clear evidence has kept the case in a state of stagnation. The case remains a reminder of the shadows of violence that loomed over the hip-hop world in the 1990s, and how those tensions reached a breaking point in the murders of two of its most prominent stars. The murder of Tupac Shakur also remains a symbol of the dangers of fame, violence, and internal struggles within the music industry. Although unresolved, his story continues to be one of the most powerful and tragic in the history of modern music, and his legacy lives on through his music, his message, and the unanswered question. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist is considered one of the greatest crimes in the history of art and one of the most baffling mysteries in the world. The art theft took place in the early morning hours of March 18, 1990, when two men dressed as police officers entered the museum in Boston, Massachusetts. The men presented themselves as police officers, and after a brief interaction with the security guards, managed to gain access to private areas of the museum, where they stole 13 masterpieces and are now valued at around $500 million. What makes this theft so fascinating and mysterious is the bold planning, the theft of some of the most famous works of art in the world, and, most perplexingly, the fact that the stolen works have never been recovered. After deceiving the security guards, the thieves proceeded to steal the museum's most valuable pieces, including works by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Manet, and Degas. Among the most famous stolen pieces were Vermeer's painting The Concert and Rembrandt's famous portrait of a man wearing a red hat, one of his most iconic works. After taking the artworks, the thieves vanished without a trace, and the museum never received any further information about the whereabouts of the paintings. What made the case even stranger was the apparent lack of clues or evidence left behind by the perpetrators. No fingerprints or physical evidence were found that could help police identify the thieves, which further complicated the investigation. In addition to the disappearance of the artworks, intrigue grew because of the way the thieves moved through the museum. There were no alarms, no gunshots, and no signs of a struggle, suggesting that the thieves knew the building very well and were extremely meticulous in their planning. Although some theories point to the robbery being carried out by an organized criminal group, the fact that the pieces have never been resold or appeared on the black market has kept speculation alive about the identity of the thieves and the motivations behind the crime. Since the robbery, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum case has been investigated by several agencies, including the FBI. The reward for information leading to the recovery of the stolen works has been set at $10 million, and the investigation has been one of the longest and most complex in the history of art theft. However, despite extensive efforts, the works have never been recovered, and the mystery of who the thieves were or what ultimately happened to the artworks remains unsolved. Theories about the thieves and their motives are wide-ranging. One of the most widely discussed hypotheses is that the robbery was carried out by an organized criminal gang with the intention of selling the stolen works on the black market. However, What makes this case even more baffling is that unlike other art thefts where the pieces eventually surface, the stolen paintings from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum have never been located or returned through illicit trade. This has led some investigators to believe that the robbery may have been a specific commission or part of a larger plan. Another theory suggests that the stolen works were destroyed or hidden, perhaps because the thieves were unable to find buyers or decided to eliminate the evidence. In this sense, some believe the pieces were damaged and discarded in a remote location such as a river or a landfill, making them even harder to recover. One of the most intriguing theories suggests that the robbery was carried out by individuals with inside knowledge of the museum, meaning someone with access to the building and an understanding of how the alarm and security systems worked. Over the years, it has been speculated that the thieves may have had some connection to the museum or to people close to the institution. Some have even suggested the possibility that it was an inside job carried out by someone who worked at the museum and was familiar with its security protocols. The fact that the artworks have never appeared on the art market has also led many to consider the possibility that the thieves were experts in the art world. Some theorize that the paintings were stolen to be kept privately as a personal investment by the thieves, or even that the works were deliberately destroyed so they could never be resold or recovered. The theft of the artworks from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum has had a profound impact not only on the art world, but also on society as a whole. The disappearance of these valuable pieces has become one of the most intriguing crime stories of the 20th century, and the lack of resolution has fueled countless books, documentaries, and investigative articles. One of the most mysterious aspects of this case is the connection between the stolen works and the museum itself. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, founded by the wealthy art collector Isabella Stewart Gardner, has a rich history of art and culture, and its collections are among the most valuable and admired in the world. The loss of the museum's most valuable pieces has left a lasting scar on its legacy, and has become a recurring topic in discussions about art security and the protection of cultural heritage in world-renowned institutions. Despite the loss, the museum has maintained a policy of not changing the layout of its exhibition rooms, leaving the walls empty where the stolen works once hung. This decision has become a symbol of loss and a constant reminder of what was taken, further fueling fascination with the heist and the ongoing search for answers. The museum has also maintained a substantial reward for information, leading to the recovery of the stolen works, and has succeeded in keeping the case alive in the public consciousness. In addition, the robbery has had a significant impact on global art security. The case highlighted the vulnerability of even the largest and most prestigious art institutions to theft, prompting increased investment in security measures to protect valuable art collections around the world. Despite continued efforts to solve the case, the theft of the artworks from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum remains an unsolved mystery, and the stolen pieces continue to be the subject of search and speculation. The story of these missing paintings remains one of the greatest enigmas in art crime history, and the robbery continues to serve as a painful lesson about the risks art faces when it falls into the wrong hands. The case remains open, and the hope that the artworks will one day be recovered still endures, even if it seems remote. The disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley is one of the most mysterious and disturbing cases of the 1990s and remains unsolved to this day. Amy, a 23-year-old woman, disappeared on March 24, 1998, during a family cruise aboard the ship Rhapsody of the Seas, operated by Royal Caribbean. Originally from Virginia, United States, Amy was on vacation with her family, enjoying a trip through the Caribbean. At first, everything seemed normal, but the morning after her disappearance, Amy was reported missing. The night before she vanished, Amy was last seen on the ship's deck, where she was with her family and friends enjoying the cruise's activities and entertainment. The following morning, Amy's father, Ron Bradley, went to his daughter's cabin to wake her up and discovered that she was no longer there. Amy's bed sheets were rumpled, and the cabin window was open, but there were no clear signs of a struggle or an accident. With no evidence of what had happened, the family alerted the crew and the authorities, who began a search of the ship and the surrounding waters. The initial investigation into her disappearance produced no immediate results. The ship's crew, along with local authorities, searched the vessel but found no trace of Amy. At first, it was believed that she may have fallen overboard, but doubts soon arose about this theory, as no evidence was found to indicate that Amy had gone into the water. The situation became even more complicated when the Bradley family discovered that, despite the extensive search, the crew had not taken immediate action to look for Amy until the family insisted. As time passed, theories about Amy's disappearance began to emerge, many of which suggested that it was not an accident but a kidnapping. Although authorities conducted a formal investigation, the case soon became an unsolved enigma, and the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley began to capture public attention, fueling all kinds of theories. Over the years, the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley has generated multiple theories about what really happened during that fateful night. Some theories suggest that Amy may have been the victim of a kidnapping, either by someone on board the ship or by individuals outside the crew. In the case of an abduction, some speculate that Amy was taken and possibly sold into a human trafficking network. One of the most widely discussed theories arose when a cruise passenger who was on board at the time of Amy's disappearance claimed to have seen a woman matching Amy's description being taken against her will by a group of men at the port of Aruba, the island where the ship had made a stop shortly before Amy vanished. According to this testimony, the woman showed signs of being forced to go with them and appeared to be under the men's control, which strengthened the theory that Amy may have fallen victim to a human trafficking ring in the region. Amy's parents also received a photograph shortly after her disappearance showing a woman with physical characteristics similar to their daughter. The photo was taken in a nightclub in Curaçao, an island near Aruba, and depicted a woman who resembled Amy. Although the image was blurry and of poor quality, the family and investigators attempted to identify the woman in the photograph, but it was never confirmed that she was Amy. In addition to the kidnapping theory, some investigators suggested that Amy may have been the victim of a sexual assault prior to her disappearance. She had last been seen with several men on the ship before she went missing, and some witnesses stated that Amy appeared to be in an uncomfortable situation with some of them. However, no definitive evidence was ever found to confirm that a sexual crime had occurred. Another theory suggested that Amy may have chosen to leave on her own, perhaps for personal or emotional reasons, and that her disappearance was the result of a voluntary act. However, this hypothesis was quickly dismissed by close family members and friends, who stated that Amy would never have left her family in that way, and that she was a responsible and devoted person. The lack of evidence and the complexity of the case have left many questions unanswered. Authorities from several countries, including the United States, Aruba, and the Cayman Islands, worked on the investigation, but the absence of physical evidence, contradictory witness statements, and the difficulty of obtaining solid proof hindered the resolution of the case. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the case of Amy Lynn Bradley remains one of the great mysteries of missing persons investigations. The absence of clear answers has left the Bradley family in a constant search for justice, while their daughter's disappearance continues to be a subject of debate and speculation. The legacy of this case has been significant, as it helped draw attention to safety aboard cruise ships and the measures that must be taken to protect passengers, especially young women traveling alone or with their families. Since the disappearance, authorities have implemented new safety regulations on cruise ships, requiring better surveillance and protocols to prevent incidents such as abductions or passenger disappearances. In addition, the case has remained a topic of discussion in the media and popular culture, with documentaries, books, and television programs attempting to shed light on what really happened. Amy's story has served as a reminder of how vulnerable people can be while traveling, and how investigations into disappearances can be complicated by factors such as a lack of evidence or limited cooperation between authorities in different countries. Amy's family, who continue to seek answers about what happened to their daughter, have kept alive the hope that the mystery will one day be solved. Although the case is officially closed, some still believe that the truth behind the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley may one day be discovered, and that the young woman who vanished in 1998 may finally be found. Meanwhile, her story remains a painful reminder of the risks travelers face and the need to continue seeking justice for those who disappear without a trace.